T. Colin Campbell uses the phrase whole food plant-based diet to do what you're saying. So one thing, if you know, a lot of people have said to me, oh, this Will Tuttle is really great. I really like him. He's so spiritual and it's really great. I really like him. The thing though is his book came out in 2005. So it's not like he's bringing up brand new cutting edge information. This came out in 2005. It was on Amazon. It got absolutely unbelievable reviews. If you go to Pandora's Lunchbox, Melanie Warner's book, it's got absolutely unbelievable reviews. If you go to Metanomics, everyone loved your books. But the question is, you worked for the New York Times, Melanie. If this stuff is out there, if all these people are like getting it completely, for 10 days they're oohing and eyeing and clapping and being like, this is outrageous and we're all clear, why don't my newspapers, I live in Long Island, every day I get Newsday, I get the New York Post, I get the New York Times, I get the Wall Street Journal, and how come this stuff that we're talking about, or this whole Metanomics stuff, doesn't seem to be properly represented in the newspapers? Are they resisting it, or they don't believe it, or am I not seeing it? How would you comment on that?
I mean, I can't really defend Newsday and the New York Post, but the New York Times does fantastic reporting on food and agriculture, both in the magazine and in the paper. It's not the dominant thing, so you could miss stuff, or you know, you go months and months without reading anything, because there's obviously a lot of other important things going on in the world. But when I was there, I was writing about the food industry, and mostly the processed food makers, but to some extent agriculture as well, for a couple of years. There was a lot of encouragement to look at the way our food system was broken, and analyze it, and look at the costs and look at the ramifications to society, as well as to businesses, what the ramifications would be for consumers reacting to a lot of the practices. So, but the reality is that most people in the country don't read the New York Times. Things might filter through when the New York Times does a big story and then television picks it up. The thing that has the most impact in terms of media is television. Just an example was the pink slime that hit a few years ago. Then suddenly everyone, I mean, pink slime had been in the food supply for about a decade, and no one ever knew it, no one ever wrote about it. And it was a guy at the New York Times, Michael Moss, that wrote the first story about pink slime, and he got documents from the FDA, and it was or the USDA rather, and it was someone inside the USDA that actually coined the term pink slime. You know, some people read the article. It had a certain level of awareness, but it wasn't until, I think it was like 2 or 3 years later, that all of us in this room heard about pink slime and the rest of the country heard about pink slime. And that was because some woman in Texas started a petition she had read Michael Moss's article after the fact, and she started a petition to get pink slime out of school lunches, and it got a ton of signatures in a really short amount of time, and ABC News picked up on it. So it's not until something hits the television and the television news that most Americans know about it and pay attention to it. And as we know, TV news they're not exactly going in there doing long-form, hard-hitting investigations. It's a lot of short stuff and sound bites, and they tend to follow what other people do. So I think that's part of the media issue.
Well, and I would also mention that your question sort of asks a question about the publishing industry. In this country, there are 300,000 books released by publishing houses every year. But if you include self-published books, the number jumps to 3 million. So there are 3 million new books published in this country every year. So there's a lot of competition. And that's on top of all this social media, Twitter and Facebook and blogs, and people have a ton of content. So we're competing with people with all that other content for eyeballs. And you never know how and when somebody's going to pay attention to your book.
And also, I think it's important to remember that the mass media is still what most people are tuned into, and it's controlled by maybe 4 large, gigantic corporations. And these gigantic corporations that have kind of bought up each other over the last 20 years control most of the TV and print media, and a lot of the film. A lot of the stuff comes through film too. That's devastating. And the meat and dairy egg industry and the pharmaceutical industry have enormous financial resources. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, but I was raised in a newspaper family, and I learned early on from my father, who ran a chain of 13 newspapers in the Boston area that was eventually actually bought out by the New York Times after I didn't take it over. And but that you don't run news that is going to make your advertisers angry with you. You know, this is an unwritten law. I mean, there's really, I think, fundamentally a huge power that large-scale money has in the media. And I remember when I was in Taiwan, it was very interesting because I was there about a year ago, and that's a country that does not do a lot of animal agriculture. You know, it's a small island, and they don't have a lot of land. They have a lot of mountains, and they have a little bit of area around, and they have a lot of people living there also. So they don't do much animal agriculture. So I was able to actually have a press meeting with the top people in the Taiwanese government, the former Prime Minister of Taiwan, the Senate Whip of Taiwan, and these are the top people in the government of Taiwan, and we could have a press meeting with you know, all the newspapers, the radio, the TV. They were all there. This was national news, where we talked about the devastating impacts of meat and dairy industry. You could never do that here. Can you imagine? That's impossible to conceive. Why? Because the meat and dairy industry would never allow that. They would never happen. But in Taiwan, since they didn't, it was like, wow, this is fabulous. You know, there's no meat and dairy industry. You can just kind of get up there. We could talk about, we could have, you know, the former prime minister and the Senate whip saying, yeah, you know, we should really make sure that we have school lunches where the kids are eating plant-based meals. We should have a tax on meat. You know, we should really, it's so devastating to our health and to our economy. It costs so much money. It's not in our best interest. We should really do something, you know. And they were talking about that on national TV. It got play all over the country. And I remember, you know, coming back here. Actually, from there I went to Australia and New Zealand. It was just the exact opposite there, where, you know, again, it was like being here, where the whole question was, well, you know, what would the industry say? You can't do that. You know, we make all our money. This is how we make our money, is from meat and dairy. And so I think, you know, I would say to them, look, if you have an industry that's absolutely devastating. Like you, for example, if the industry, instead of being meat and dairy, if it was making weapons, right, making bombs and mines, and you just hope that nobody ever shoots those nuclear weapons and hopes that nobody ever steps on those mines you're putting everywhere. But that's how we make all our money, though. And so if someone came along and said, well, I think we should have peace. What do you mean, peace? You're going to destroy our economy if you have peace. We're a war-based economy. We've got to have some war, otherwise it's bad. And it's the same thing with the meat and dairy industry, you know. And actually we are, and at least with bombs, you're hoping you don't use it. With meat and dairy, you actually are using it. You actually are killing the animals. You actually are destroying everything as you're doing it, and devastating every dimension of society. And I think the meat and dairy industry have pretty much a huge control, and the pharmaceutical industry over our media. And it's great, I think, that we can have Twitter and Facebook and so forth. But from my point of view, there is an enormous amount of pressure. I mean, there are people, I've seen this on Facebook. The pharmaceutical industry and a lot of these other industries pay people to get on there and to write comments on articles. And someone, you know, I've seen this. You write an article talking about the devastating impacts of GMOs or of meat and dairy, and there's paid people. They're paying a lot of people to write comments against those articles, and to, you know, this is what we're up against. When you have a lot of money, you have the capacity to influence opinion. You can just blast a message everywhere. There's no way you can escape. And the mass media is, from the point of view of vegan living, has not been our friend. I think it's moving in that direction just because it's becoming more and more obvious that this is the way we have to go. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. But I think we the people, have to be very savvy about this and be very aware. I just saw, I mean, just the other day, 2 days ago, there was this guy from Stanford, the study from Stanford saying the way we could solve the problem with California's water crisis is by banning organic foods. And researchers from Stanford University have done a study, and it's, they're paid off by they're Monsanto shills, basically, and this is blasted all over Fox News, that it's organic agriculture in California that is destroying. That's why we have a water shortage. This is the kind of stuff that the media is blasting out to the millions, and we may not be aware of that, but that's what's going on. I think it's important, again, important to be aware of that.